Hi, my name is George, and I'm the creator of Dogma Games, and I am currently working on my first game called Wake Out of Twilight. Wake Out of Twilight is a 2D platformer game set in a futuristic dystopia. You can really help me out by going to my Steam page and wishlisting my game. It would mean a lot to me. And today I decided that we have a thing in my game that I could improve on. So I set up this little test area, a little level, so I can kind of demonstrate what my idea is. And what I want to change is this spring component that I have in my games. And let me show you how they work right now. And I set up these two platforms because when I bounce on this spring, I needed to come up to this height. So that works. The spring currently works right now, but I'll tell you what I need to change about it in a little bit. And then the spring also has a feature too that where if you time a jump correctly, it'll bounce you higher. And when you bounce higher, I needed you to get to this height of a platform. So that's basically what I need in the game to happen right now. But and it's working. However, I need to change the prefab up a little bit to make it more simplified. I'll admit when I was first creating it, I perhaps didn't fully understand what I needed or how I could do it. And so the way I made it was, this is a spring that I'm hovering over right now, and this actually just a combination of two components. And then I have the spring, which is right here, and I believe this is basically what just renders like this whole spring sprite right here. And this is has control of the collider, right? So I can't run into it like this. But I had troubles making it so that it bounced straight up too. What I wanted to do was make it so that only when you got on top of it would you get the spring action like that. And so what I did as sort of a hack to make that work was I put you can't see it right now for some reason. Oh, it's on this one. So if you see it, there's a little trigger on top where if you hit that, then that's just going to initiate the spring action that makes you go up. What I want to do today is get rid of this, and I kind of want it to just be one object. It doesn't need to be a combination like that. And with my new knowledge, I think I know how to do that now, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to make that change. So it's going to be a bit of a coding exercise and a bit of a coding demonstration. So let's get started. Keep in mind this is a prefab that I've used throughout my game already, and so that's why I set up this little test area, because I needed to do, these are the two things that I needed to do. I needed to bounce up here for a normal jump, and I needed to bounce to the left for a super jump. I'll call it a super jump for this video, or a timed jump. I might switch off throughout the video saying both of those. So keep in mind that is something that I use throughout my game already. So if I break any functionality, then I'm probably going to have to go through my game and make a bunch of adjustments, and that's not desirable. I really want to make it so that I only have to change it here and then on this prefab, and that it'll work everywhere else. So let's get started. First of all, this is basically what my spring is. My spring logic is right here on this small collider that I made, and I really want this spring logic to be all on probably what this box collider is. And you can't see it right now, but there's actually a collider going around this whole thing. That's what's causing me to not run into it. So let's look at the code. So for my spring, it's pretty basic, and remember, this is only this small collider that's on top, that's pretty much sitting on top of the spring sprite. And so when you hit it, it's like on trigger 2D. When you hit it, then it's going to bounce you straight up. To bounce straight up, I'm basically getting the animator and starting the bounce animation. We won't mess too much with that. We play a sound effect, and we won't mess with that either. And then we have to bounce the player up. We may or may not mess with this, but altogether we do want to do all these four things. We just have to modify when. Let me show you another reason why I kind of wanted to change this to be one component. There's a bit of a flaw in the way I designed it originally. So if it's possible the way it is that you can land on it without hitting the collider that will bounce you up. And you can see this is a collider for the player. So it's technically on top, and it's going to bounce up. And I think that this has actually been creating some problems in the gameplay. It's just making it not as smooth as I want it to be. So what do I want to do? This spring script, I actually want to try to put it on the collider. So what I'm going to do is, this is the one with the script. I'm going to disable this. Or can I do that? Okay, I remember what I did. This actually controls the sprite and the top part, and that's like a trigger collider. And I remember adding this just because I wanted another collider to go around this to prevent people from going over it. And so what I should do is actually fix this collider. I shouldn't need this one anymore. Yeah. But remember, this is the one that kind of lets you just like walk through it. Or it prevents you from walking through it. So when I disable it, I should actually be able to like walk into it and bounce up, which is not what I want really. Right? I want this to also be like a wall. So let's come back, and this is a collider that we have to fix. So let's fix the collider. This, first of all, we don't want it to be a trigger anymore. And then we want it to come down. Want to make sure that it's pretty exact. That should be good. This comes over. And actually, I think this should be, now that I'm moving this over, and I'm watching this size X factor, and I notice that it's coming like really close to 1, and I think it's supposed to be at 1. So I'm just gonna type it in 1. Oops, not 41. 1, and I think that's the intended factor for that, and I think for the Y is supposed to also be 1. And I notice that this is offset a little bit, and that's because this offset is over here. So I think if I zero these out, then this is what the box collider was supposed to look like before I went in myself and started modifying it. So that's what I want it to look like. Another thing is that it's not a trigger collider anymore, and the script is saying on trigger entry. So when I run into it, nothing's going to happen. I'm walking on it, but nothing's happened. There's even this bug that I'm stuck on it, which probably won't matter because once I land on it, it's going to shoot me up. But just to show you, it's not reacting like it was before. So this has to change to it's like on. Let me see if it autocorrects for me. On collision, it should be on collision something, which I don't remember. So I'm going to look into one of my other scripts and try to copy paste something that I've found before. Okay, so I found one in one of my platform scripts. So I'm just gonna copy this. I don't memorize a lot of this stuff, so I'm actually just going to copy and paste it. And so now if I save this and I go into to Unity after it loads, now it should shoot me up now as soon as I hit the side of it, which is not what we want, but this is I'm just showing you the steps on like what's happening. So now it's considered a collision when I come to the side of it and I get shot up. It still works on the top, and it even works how I intended with the shooting up part of it too. Like that. No, you know, bouncing on these things is actually kind of fun. Okay, but anyway, now the behavior that we want to get rid of is running into the side of it and then bouncing up. That's not how we want the character to interact with these things. I'd prefer it if we ran into it and then it's kind of like a wall until you jump on top of it. So that's what we're going to do next. So if I go back to the script, so this is going to trigger once the collision has started, and then it's also going to make sure that the player, the colliding object is the player itself. Okay. Now, something that I've done before is I've done something where I cast the rigid body straight up. So what I'm going to do is I need the rigid body first. So I'm going to get the rigid body 2D from this object, which I do have on the object. It is right. Rigid body 2D. It's right there. Let me close that to make it simpler. So I do have a rigid body component on this object. And what I want to do is I want to cast up, and there's a bunch of examples in my code for doing this. So I'm just going to look for it in my code again and pretty much copy paste it, and I'll explain what it does after I find it. So now I copy pasted a bunch of kind of code that I've been reusing throughout my game to check things that are basically a certain distance away from an object. So what I previously did was I have the rigid body now, and I needed to create an array of these raycast hits, and it's just an empty array. And what I'm just going to do is hold on to this array, and I'm going to check it later on for collisions. So what the special part of this is right here, the rigid body dot cast, and what this does is it casts basically like a check in a certain direction. The first thing it needs is the direction, which I'm just going to say vector 2 dot up, which is basically just straight up from the object. So if I'm looking at this spring right here, basically whenever a player collides with it, it's going to check in the up direction this way, and I set it to check the carry distance, which is 0.1, and that might need to shrink or might need to grow in the future, but I'm just going to check it at the 0.1 distance for now. And hits, again, this is the array that I set it to. Basically all the hits that it finds it's gonna throw them in this variable, and it's also going to keep track of how many times it hits. And so since we know how many times it's going to hit, that's how many times how many of this hits array that we want to check. So for every hit, we're going to check this collider. If the collider is the player, then, and if the player is grounded. I'm not sure if I need this part right now. Basically, this is a variable on the player itself to check that it's grounded. But I don't think it needs to be grounded to do it. And basically, we're going to say if the hit is the player, then I think that's when we're going to want to do all this logic right here. So let's copy and paste that in here. And if everything works as expected, then this is what's going to be the working piece of code. But let's check if I'm right or wrong. Okay, so if I run into it, it stops the player, just like I wanted it to. And it's also bouncing me up. It bounces there, and it bounces there on a timed jump when I time it correctly. And the cool thing about this is if I hover over the player and let me see. If I'm over the player, I want to be able to check the collider. So there's a collider. And there shouldn't be any way for me to jump on the spring without getting shot up. And I think that is ready. And it looks kind of cool now. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that this prefab that I've been modifying isn't broken, because I'm going to need to save this to the rest of the game, and I want all my springs to behave this way now. And so I've already disabled this, so it should be safe to get rid of this. How do you delete? Okay, Open prefab. I think I do want to open the prefab. Let's check it out. Okay. Yeah, from the prefab, I'll delete that. So now I need to, I think what I need to do is copy all the components here. If I copy all the components, I don't know if I can do that. Let me try to find a way to do that. So I found a way to, basically I went into the prefab and I copied each component, and then I went to the parent, which I wanted to be basically only one, like a non-nested object as my prefab from here going from here on forward. So I've copied all the components on the inside on this child, which I want to keep, and then I pasted it on the outside. And I think the last thing that I need to do is from here I just need to copy these presets. Let me copy, I believe you can copy the values. Copy component. And then I want to go back into the prefab. I'll open the prefab, and then from the prefab, the parent, I want to, if I go here to the collider, if I paste component as values, there. So then everything should be on the outside, and I should be able to safely remove this, or maybe not. Let me undo that. Let me see the reason that happened. Oh, the position. In non-2D mode. So like if this is in 2D mode here in my scene window, you can clearly see it in the scene. But when you play it, you obviously can't see it. So if you go to 3D mode, you can kind of see it's out here in space. And for some reason, I don't know how this happened, but if you look at my transform over here, the position on the Z axis is way in the background. I don't know how that happened, but if I set it to 0 might work. Yeah, just set it to 0, and you can see it in the game window now. So let me make sure the Z is zeroed out. I want to make sure that position is 0 in the prefab. I should probably set like that one in the prefab. So let me open that up. Z is way in the background. If I zero that out, I'm changing the Z axis from prefab. And if I play it, let me take the scene out of 2D, or out of 3D, I mean, and put it into 2D. Okay. So now, that's how it should look, and that's what I was intending to do the whole time. There does seem to be a delay when it checks. Let me see if there's a way I can change that. If I change... So sometimes when things are not as responsive as I would prefer them to be, I go into the rigid body and I try to see if there's anything that I could change. To me, I think interpolate means that it's kind of checking more, and continuous should also mean that it's checking more for physics events. But let me see if just the interpolate part helps that issue. I noticed that there's still a bit of lag, what seems. Yeah, see, that is what I don't want to happen right there. So let me try to see if making it continuous would work. No changes anywhere else. So let me try. Still a little bit of lag. So this is probably, I think that this is going to be a problem with the player then. The only thing I can think of to change in the spring, let me update the rigid body preset though. Apply to the prefab. I do want this to be in the prefab. Let me save that and let's see if we can make it a change to this rigid body logic that might make this even faster. So one thing we could do is, instead of waiting for this on collision event, is we can try to add it to, we can add this to the update. All right, and let me comment all this out. And if it runs in the update, let's see if it's more responsive. This is just a test. I just want to know what's going on here, on why sometimes it doesn't bounce you immediately. So if you notice that this is actually, it seems more responsive, but there is a problem though. If you have your audio turned up, you can clearly hear that there's probably multiple bounces that are going up. If I put a, let's see, if I put a debug in here and I said bounce, you'll know when I'm bouncing, and then you'll probably see in this console down here, what you're probably going to see is when I bounce on this spring here, you're going to see probably a whole list of bounces in this log. Let's try it. See, it triggers multiple times. Let's clear it. 5 times. 4 times right there. So I think it's triggering the bounce too much here. So what I could do is I could put a bounce cooldown on it. Let me get this addressed to start with. So something that I don't like is that at every update we're trying to get the component of this rigid body, which I don't think is a good thing. I don't think we should be, for every update frame, we shouldn't be creating new variables here anyway. So like a lot of these variables where we're doing all this fetch stuff, I really don't want to do it with every update. Maybe it's not so bad here actually, since in theory we should only be doing this once per frame, and that's only if we make a collision. But with these ones, with these two for sure, I actually do want to instantiate these up here. So a private rigid body, and also make this a variable and make it private too. And do I need to set it to 0 every time? And this we should only have to do one time. So let's do it in the start function, or the start method, and then I think this is technically more efficient. Now, so now to ensure that we don't bounce too many times in a frame, actually only want to call this basically one time and then that one time should send the player going straight up, and then we don't need to play it multiple times, because as you can witness, this audio part played multiple times and it kind of sounded nasty. So let's put another variable in here. I'm going to call it private, make it a boolean, and we'll say is loaded. We'll call it is loaded. I will say that's true, and it's always is loaded. And so we'll say if we're doing this, let's say, now I think the thing is, it's called once per frame. Let's say we only do this check if our spring is loaded. We'll try this first. What I want to try first is check if all this only happens. And what I want to do first is I want to check if the spring is loaded. I want to check for a bounce. If it is bounced, then I want to say is loaded is equal to false. And then this will make sure that we only bounce it one time. And if it's happening the way I think it is, where maybe multiple update frames are actually causing it to bounce, then we can set it to false here, so it's not loaded anymore, and it's not going to check until it is loaded again. So we'll also have to set basically a coroutine to load the spring again once the player has bounced, and we can just load it after, say, it should be after like half a second or something like that. And then so let's make a method here, void, we'll call it load spring, and all we want to do in here is we'll say is loaded equal true. And I think we can do something called invoke here. Put the name of the method. See, so to use invoke, we're going to need a method name, which we have already, and a float time. And then we'll put the time up here because I like keeping all my variables up here. We'll say private float, and we'll call it spring cooldown. We'll say half a second. Let's try that. Spring cooldown. So in theory, we'll say when the spring finds the player on top of it, we're going to bounce him, and then we're going to say we're not loaded anymore. We can't load until we can't bounce the player until we're loaded again. And then we're basically saying we're going to load it again after a spring cooldown, which is half a second. So let's see if this works. We'll know if it works if we should only get one bounce per time we land on it. So let's keep this log in here. So if it's working correctly, we'll just see bounce, 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 instead of like a bunch of bounces just showing up in the console at a single trigger. Reset it. I made a small mistake here where when I'm trying to get the component for the rigid body, I claimed it like this is a new variable, which I don't want. I actually want to use the existing variable that I put up here, and that's what made the quick error that we saw before. So now we're only calling the rigid body one time, and then we have access to it for every update function. And so now if we go back into the scene, when we start it, we should only see one bounce in the console. Okay, so it's running, and if we jump, now you can only hear the sound for the bounce one time, and if I clear the console, every time I bounce, it only prints one time. So it's running correctly. Yeah, and so now every time I hit the spring, it is only triggering one time every time I hit it. And I can bounce normally, and I can bounce super jump, so I can get all the way up here. And that's about it. I successfully redid my prefab so that it's if I get out of the game view, so now there's no nested object here anymore. This is the prefab that I'm going to see and I'm gonna be able to use for all my projects, or all my scenes in the game. And once again, if you can go to my Steam page and wishlist my game, it is called Wake Out of Twilight. It would help me out a lot. I will have links in the description to navigate and find, my Steam page, my website, and there's also a link for a free demo there too that you'll be able to find. Anyway, have a good day, and I look forward to creating more content. And thank you for watching. Before I leave you guys too, I want to also make sure that everyone can get like one last look at the code before I leave, and things I would do to clean up my code before I leave it and save it to my workflow. My work branch is I would delete the bugs, the logs that I were just using to just debug the code. And since I commented this out, I kept this because if there was anything that I needed to reference from the old functionality, I would keep this here, or if I needed to revert back for whatever reason, I could see the old work. But since I successfully rewrote it, this is all clean now, and I'm able to clean it up and remove it. And so this is what the cleaned up file looks like now. Remember, always clean up your code before you're finished with it.